It's Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, Trump's tariff merry-go-round. It has been a dizzying week since Trump announced a brand new tariff regime on nearly every country on the planet that does trade with the U.S., also some that don't. And since then, the stock market has had the worst daily stretch of losses this century. Last night at midnight, Trump's tariffs went into effect. Now, I talked about those last week, but just as a refresher, Trump announced this new tariff regime on, like I said, every country that trades with the U.S. and a few that don't. Each of those countries has a minimum of a 10% tariff on it, with many more being slapped with much higher rates than that. Now, again, tariffs are prices added to imports, which means the importer, in our case, American companies, pay those higher costs to import whatever they're importing, and then they raise the prices for us, the consumers, because it costs more to bring those goods into the U.S., so effectively tariffs work as a sales tax. In the last day or so, Trump also announced that he was putting an additional 50% tariff on goods from China, bringing the overall tariff rate to 104%, more than doubling the cost of the things that we get from China. But he also hit the European Union with tariffs up near 40%, much, much higher than we're used to paying and they're used to paying when it comes to trade with the U.S. And just the threat of those sent the markets reeling, losing more than 1,000 points a day, which, since the tariffs were announced, and then again when Trump announced the jump in rates on China, those losses kept happening. Now, I'll admit, stock market points don't mean a whole heck of a lot to me. I find the stock market, frankly, confusing, but also because it kind of feels like a big scam to me. What all that does mean is economists estimate that over the last week or so, the U.S. has lost more than $1 trillion a day, with some estimates for the overall losses stemming from the stock market, like I mentioned last week, up near $30 trillion that's been collectively wiped out from the economy. And on top of that, China and the EU put their own retaliatory tariffs on American goods at midnight last night, which caused even more market turmoil when the opening bell rang today. And since all of this has been happening, there's been one other thing. The U.S. bond market has started a massive sell-off. Now, you don't really need to know exactly what this means. You should just know that when the stock market tumbles like this, usually that means it's good for the U.S. Treasury because more people start buying U.S. bonds, which are investments in the U.S. as a country, not just the stock market, and bonds are much more stable. But in this case, bonds have started to be sold off at alarming rates, which is raising interest rates investors pay on them, which are called yields, meaning the bonds are less stable. First, this is the ballgame when it comes to whether or not we are heading into a recession or worse. If confidence in the strength of the U.S. and its economy drop, that's how we slide into a really bad economic situation. Second, this is what Trump really cares about. Like I said last week, the White House cares about interest rates because it's how Trump understands money. And most of his cabinet, which has the most billionaires we've ever seen in these positions, also cares about this deeply. It's because the ultra-wealthy retain their wealth by balancing loans from different banks and using those loans to pay off the interest on other loans, not off the physical things they own or their income like you and I would pay loans on a credit card. So if interest rates go up, it'll be a lot harder for people like Trump and his friends to stay rich or to pay off the loans they have to get rich in the first place. And I was going to say that that's the real big thing to talk about today. But when I was writing this episode, Trump announced he was doing two huge things. First, he was raising the tariffs on China to an effective 125% rate, which will be crushing to many American businesses. But then, and even more important, he undercut himself by saying he was putting in place a 90% pause for 75 countries that have already reached out to the U.S. to negotiate trade, while also saying some countries will go back to a 10% tariff for the next 3 months, except China. But it's not clear which or how many of those countries will actually get that paused rate. And this is Trump calling his own bluff here. He blinked when no one asked him to on these tariffs because It comes on the heels of a lot of his White House advisors saying these aren't about negotiations, and even Trump said that himself yesterday.
They can both be true. There can be permanent tariffs, and there can also be negotiations, because there are things that we need beyond tariffs.
So that is Trump wanting it both ways, right? But then, with this 90-day pause, it really does feel like he's undoing all of that. And just a few minutes ago, as I was writing, here's what the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, said when he was asked about what the plan was here.
Can you explain more of the decision-making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No.
So just a flat no. There isn't a reason. There isn't a plan. And in the meantime, the livelihoods and lifetimes of savings and retirement savings of real people are being driven into the ground. I also need to say here that Trump front-ran his own announcement by posting on social media, "Now is a great time to buy." He said that just 3 hours before he announced this tariff pause, which is dangerously close to a president telling millions of Americans to engage in insider trading. But, what are rules or laws anymore anyway? Now, I can already hear people, some of them who've been in the comments on previous episodes and will be in the comments for this one, who say Trump is a business genius, and those of us trying to understand the tariffs just don't get it. Well, first of all, thank you for that sweet, sweet engagement. It really helps the show. Second, let's look at Trump's business history. He's filed for bankruptcy 6 times. His Trump Entertainment Resorts filed in 2009. Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts filed in 2004. In 1992, he had 3 bankruptcies, 1 for the Plaza Hotel and 2 with the Atlantic City casinos he owned then. And then the first major one he had was in 1991 with the Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City, which had only been open for a year. The man lost money running a casino, and that was also the business that spurred him to publish The Art of the Deal, which is what everyone in his administration and all of his supporters turn to say how he's such a prolific deal maker. And for what it's worth here, Trump also filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in all of those. That's pretty common, but what it does is it shields business owners from having to feel the personal financial cost of their business failing, and it allows banks to restructure a debt repayment plan, and ultimately, it only really costs the shareholders involved in this company any real money. And that kind of scheme seems to be the only one Trump knows how to run, and it looks like it's the exact thing he's trying to do right now with the American economy. And this entire thing, with the 90-day pause, the new tariffs, came as a shock to not just every one of his supporters, to the media, to average people, but also apparently to our U.S. trade representative, who was the person Trump appointed to run global trade for the U.S. Now, that man's name is Jamieson Greer, and he apparently found out about these tariffs and the pause during a hearing this afternoon.
Mr. Trade Representative, are you aware that the tariffs have been paused?
I am, yes.
When were you made aware of that?
Well, I understood the decision was made a few minutes ago. It's
sitting here
under discussion.
Sitting here under discussion. So did you know that this was under discussion, and why did you not include that as part of your opening remarks?
So typically what I don't do is divulge the contents of my discussions with
What are the
President
details of the pause?
Well, my understanding is that because so many countries have decided not to retaliate, we're going to have about 90 days.
So that was Representative Stephen Horsford from Nevada there. Greer really only seems to know the same thing we all knew at that point in time, which was exactly what it was from the social media posts that Trump put up. Now, is there a world in which Greer didn't want to divulge this information in a public hearing before it was announced to not affect the markets? Sure. But it's honestly pretty weird for him to not have a statement ready for this hearing, knowing if he knew that these pause on the tariffs were going to drop, and that there wasn't one ready for the press conference about the changes that happened after Trump made the announcement. He also likely could have worked with members of the House to postpone his hearing, knowing Trump was going to do this, but he didn't do that either. Now, before today's whiplash announcement, Republicans from across the country were falling all over themselves to defend the tariffs despite the economic consequences. Here's New York Congressman Mike Lawler just yesterday.
High prices obviously are not something anybody wants to pay. I understand the consternation that people have. But when you're making a change in U.S. policy, as they have, obviously there's going to be a little bit of a short-term volatility in the market. We obviously need to watch that, and we need to make sure that these agreements get done quickly. And as a result, you will see the market boom.
And that's been sort of the thing. A little pain now for a lot of gain later. That's just not really clear if this is going to work, and now it doesn't seem like any of that matters with these pauses. But it's not just public statements, it's also a part of the current budget talks, because yes, we're doing that again in the House. The House has put a provision in to these talks, which they're voting on right now as I'm recording, that prevents members of Congress to introduce bills that disapprove of the tariffs until September 30th by counting the next 5 months as a single day on the congressional calendar. I'm not joking. This is the actual language from the bill. Each day from April 9th, 2025 to September 30th, 2025 shall not constitute a calendar day for the purposes of Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, end quote, which is the act that Trump is trying to use to put these tariffs in place without congressional review or approval, which normally presidents need. Essentially, what the House is trying to say here is that 2025 really is going to be the longest year. Now, privately and publicly, there have been a lot of worries about what the tariffs will do and were doing, some of which might have pushed Trump to reverse course today. Among them, some pretty influential senators from Midwestern farm states. Here's Senator Tom Tillis in a Senate hearing with Trade Rep Greer just yesterday.
We've got a novel approach here in terms of an a la prima approach. I'm not a trade expert, and I'm not going to question it at this point. I do have a question about, at the end of the day, the other thing in management consulting we like to focus on is this concept of one throat to choke. In other words, when you're finally taking a look at a strategy, someone has to own it, and you can't say that it's the president or the vice president. So my first question to you, in this scenario, the decision maker who decided the a la prima approach, who has obviously had to have spent time anticipating what we saw in the markets and some of the pushback, I'm assuming this all got gamed out because it's a novel approach, it needed to be thought out. Whose throat do I get to choke if this proves to be wrong?
So first of all, that a good couple of days if you're Jamieson Greer. Getting grilled on Capitol Hill is not fun for anyone. Second, what is Tillis talking about? I've been in a lot of offices, and I've never heard this phrase, but you know what, man? Point made. Now, Tillis is one of 7 Republican senators who have signed on to a bill called the Trade Review Act of 2025. It would give Congress the ability to approve new tariffs by forcing a 48-hour window for the White House to explain whatever tariffs it was doing to Congress, and then Congress could decide whether to give the president the power to enact those tariffs. And more specifically, for the current tariffs that are on pause, this act would also force new tariffs to end after 60 days without congressional approval. So essentially, this act is the opposite of what the House wants. Now, this is a bipartisan bill co-sponsored by Republican Senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley, and Democratic Senator from Washington, Maria Cantwell. And it's moderately popular in the Senate, although a lot of people would feel like this is a third rail to jump on, given how Trump reacts to this kind of a thing. Now, there have also been Republicans who have called for a reality check on the tariffs outside of legislation. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who is functionally a libertarian, has become a loud voice against the tariffs.
I mean, the whole debate is so fundamentally backwards and upside down. It's based on a fallacy. And the fallacy is this, that somehow in a trade, someone must lose. That somehow when you trade with someone, there's a loser and someone's taking advantage of you and China's ripping you off or Japan's ripping you off. It's absolutely a fallacy. Every trade that occurs in the marketplace is mutually beneficial. If you have a free society and I trade with you, if you want to sell me your coat and I give you $200 for it, we both agree to it and we're both happy with the trade. No American consumer trades with China. They trade with Walmart, or they may buy something from China, but they individually buy something they want and they make a decision. The trade is always a win-win.
So Paul has been an on and off again Trump ally and supporter, but he's taking his cues from the business and legal community here. Now, I talked about this in a Make It Make Sense Substack post yesterday about some of this pushback we're seeing, and particularly when it comes to legal fights. The biggest one is from the National Civil Liberties Alliance, which is a conservative legal group that's backed by Trump's own Supreme Court advisor, Leonard Leo, from the Federalist Society. They filed a suit on behalf of a Florida stationery and paper company. Now, that lawsuit alleges that Trump violated the Constitution by not getting proper congressional approval for the tariffs that were placed specifically on China under the guise of a national emergency anti-drug trafficking law, and caused this paper business some real harm by increasing the price of the paper they buy from China. Now, another conservative, albeit a regular Trump critic, Ilya Salman, who's a George Mason University law professor, recently wrote in Reason magazine that Trump's tariffs are illegal based on the same reasoning as that paper lawsuit, and is reportedly actively recruiting to bring a second lawsuit that may end up going to the Supreme Court with that lawsuit from the NCLA. And those cases together may prove to be a compelling one to the Supreme Court, which has been famously pro-business and has been actively looking for ways to rein in the president after the administration has called for federal judges to be impeached over rulings Trump has disliked, and has needed to show its willingness to push back on the executive branch after giving the president some broad power to commit crimes while in office last summer. But maybe the most compelling voices for Trump are his donors and big money supporters. Chief among them, Elon Musk, who, according to the Washington Post this week, had been trying to talk Trump out of specifically high tariffs on China. China is a big one for Musk because he needs a lot of things from China, like semiconductors and microchips and things that go into electric cars or spaceships or satellites. Those all come from China. Or it will just be more expensive for him to do business over there, or he won't be able to do business there at all, even though he has billions of dollars in investment from Beijing. Now, according to the Post, those private chats between Trump and Musk weren't immediately great for Musk. He's sort of in the middle of a falling out with Trump. Doge has been a pretty big distraction. Lots of talk about, Musk is really running the White House, and that gets under Trump's skin. So there was some reporting last week that Musk might be on his way out relatively soon, sooner than people thought under how long he was supposed to be there as a special government employee. That is for a different episode, more than likely a different piece on the Substack. But as of today, it does seem like some of those chats that didn't get very far with Trump might have sunk in over time. And so did calls from other big money supporters like billionaire Bill Ackman, who has been a major Trump backer in the tech world, and yesterday called for the president to enact this 90-day pause, saying online that if the president doesn't pause the effect of the tariffs soon, many small businesses will go bankrupt, medium-sized businesses will be next, saying a 90-day pause will let Trump do what he wants without destroying small businesses in the short term, and ending this post with "May cooler heads prevail." And right now, it's not clear that's what's happening. It just doesn't seem like there's a plan or any cooler heads in the room to tell Trump no. So, what can we do about this? Honestly, not much. You can call your representatives or your senators and tell them you don't want the next 5 months to be a single day and you want them to do their job when it comes to making sure Congress has a say in how the U.S. approaches global trade. You should definitely be looking at your finances, though I know it is hard to know what comes next, but it is a good time to make sure you're recession-proofing as much as you can. And that's it, because we don't know what will happen in the next 24 hours, let alone the next few weeks. And I'm sorry to end on such a bummer on this one. Everything is just so fluid right now that it's hard to nail down exactly what we need to make sense of. But that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. You can subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got bonus articles up there all week long. It's just $5 a month and really helps keep this show going. If you don't want to do that, continue to share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Friday.